Sir, those meals are not for passengers like you. The sentence floated through the first-class cabin so casually that several passengers barely looked up from their screens. But Marcus Reed heard every word. He was seated in 3A beside the window, 35,000 feet above Texas, watching late afternoon sunlight spill across a sea of white clouds. The leather seat beneath him was exactly the seat printed on his boarding pass. The first-class meal listed on the airline menu was included with that ticket. Yet somehow, as silver trays began appearing throughout the cabin, Marcus was the only passenger being skipped. The scent of grilled steak and warm bread drifted through the aisle. Flight attendants moved smoothly between rows, placing elegant meals before travelers who barely glanced up to thank them. Across from Marcus, an older businessman received his tray. Behind him, a woman in a tailored suit received hers. Row after row, every passenger was served. Then the cart reached Marcus. Senior flight attendant Lauren Whitmore glanced briefly at him before looking away. Instead of reaching for one of the prepared first-class meals, she pulled a small snack box from the lower compartment. Pretzels, crackers, a tiny package of cookies. She placed it on his tray table. "There you go," she said. Marcus looked at the box, then at the rows around him filled with steaming meals served on white plates. "I believe there may be a mistake," he said politely. Lauren's smile tightened. "No mistake, sir." Marcus remained calm. "The menu I received at boarding listed a first-class meal." Lauren folded her arms slightly. "Those meals are reserved for first-class passengers." For a moment, the only sound came from the steady hum of the aircraft engines. Marcus looked down at the boarding pass resting beside his phone. Then he looked back up. "I am a first-class passenger." Lauren's expression never changed. "The meal assignment on my list says otherwise." She pushed the service cart forward before Marcus could reply. Several nearby passengers exchanged glances. Nobody said anything. Most returned to their meals. Marcus watched Lauren continue down the aisle, serving everyone else. The sunlight from the window reflected across the silverware beside him. He slowly opened the snack box. The older businessman across the aisle frowned. "That seems odd," he muttered. Marcus offered a small smile. "Perhaps." He opened the package of crackers and took one. No anger, no argument, no scene, just quiet observation. 20 minutes later, Lauren passed through the cabin again collecting empty plates. She paused beside Marcus long enough to notice the untouched cookies still resting inside the box. "Everything all right?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "I was just wondering something." "What is that?" Lauren replied. Marcus looked directly at her. His voice remained calm. "How often do people decide who belongs somewhere before checking the facts?" For the first time, Lauren hesitated. Only for a second. Then she forced another smile and continued down the aisle. Marcus turned back toward the window. Far below, the setting sun painted the clouds gold. Nearby passengers returned to their conversations. The cabin seemed normal again. But somewhere in the quiet space between a missing meal and a simple question, something had already begun that nobody on that aircraft fully understood. The meal service ended, but the feeling remained. Empty plates were collected. Coffee cups were refilled. Soft conversation returned to the cabin. Yet the small snack box still sat on Marcus Reed's tray table like a quiet reminder that something was not right. Outside the window, the sun drifted lower across the horizon, turning the clouds beneath the aircraft into waves of gold and amber. Most passengers settled back into their seats. Some opened laptops. Others watched movies or reviewed documents. The flight seemed ordinary again, at least on the surface. Lauren Whitmore continued moving through first class with practiced efficiency. She offered dessert options to passengers. She remembered names. She laughed politely at small jokes. Anyone watching would have seen an experienced professional doing her job. Yet every time she reached row 3, her expression changed slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough. Marcus noticed. Across the aisle, the older businessman who had questioned the missing meal earlier finally leaned closer. "Forgive me for asking," he said quietly, "but are you sure there was not some issue with your reservation?" Marcus smiled faintly. "I am sure." The man glanced toward Lauren. "Then I do not understand." Marcus looked down at the snack box. "Neither do I." The answer seemed to bother the man more than it bothered Marcus. A few rows ahead, another passenger pressed the call button. Lauren immediately appeared with a warm smile. "How can I help you?" she asked. The woman requested another beverage. Lauren happily provided it. Moments later, a passenger requested extra bread. Lauren delivered it. Another asked for a different dessert. Lauren found one. Every request was met with enthusiasm. Every passenger seemed important. Every passenger except one. Nearly an hour into the flight, the aroma of freshly baked cookies drifted from the galley. Lauren and the crew began distributing warm desserts to first-class passengers. One by one, plates appeared across the cabin. Chocolate cake, cheesecake, fresh fruit. The service looked elegant and effortless. Then Lauren reached Marcus. Without slowing down, she placed another snack package on his tray table. This one contained peanuts and crackers. She continued walking. Several nearby passengers looked up immediately. The older businessman stared in disbelief. "You have got to be kidding me," he muttered. Marcus glanced at the new package, then at the desserts surrounding him. Across the aisle, forks tapped softly against ceramic plates. A woman near the front accepted a slice of cheesecake with a smile. Marcus received peanuts. The contrast was impossible to miss now. Even passengers who had ignored the earlier incident were beginning to pay attention. Lauren returned moments later carrying a coffee pot. Marcus looked up. "Excuse me." She stopped. "Yes." Marcus pointed gently toward the dessert plates around him. "Was there another issue with my meal assignment?" Lauren's smile disappeared. "Sir, I have already explained the situation." Marcus nodded slowly. "Actually, you have not." For a moment, silence settled between them. The engines hummed steadily beneath the cabin floor. Sunlight flickered through the windows as the aircraft crossed another layer of clouds. Lauren lowered her voice. "Some passengers receive benefits based on their actual status with the airline." Marcus studied her expression carefully. Then he looked back at the untouched snack package. "I see." Lauren walked away before he could say anything else. But several passengers had heard every word. And for the first time since boarding, the looks Marcus received were no longer curious. They were concerned. Because whatever explanation Lauren believed she had, it was becoming harder and harder for anyone else to believe it. The atmosphere in first class had changed. Nobody announced it. Nobody spoke about it openly. Yet the shift was there, hanging in the cabin like static before a storm. Passengers who had ignored the first incident could no longer ignore the second. It was one thing to miss a meal. It was another to be skipped twice while sitting in the same cabin as everyone else. Marcus Reed remained calm. The unopened package of peanuts rested beside the first snack box. Through the window, the sky had darkened into deep shades of orange and blue as the aircraft continued eastward. The older businessman across the aisle finally closed his laptop. "I have flown this airline for 15 years, he said quietly. "I have never seen anything like this." Marcus looked up from the book resting in his lap. "Neither have I." The man hesitated. "Are you going to file a complaint?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I have not decided." The answer seemed almost impossible to understand. Most passengers would have been furious. Yet Marcus looked more interested in observing than reacting. Near the front galley, Lauren Whitmore reviewed inventory reports on a tablet. A younger flight attendant named Emily Carter approached carrying empty trays. "Lauren," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" Lauren barely looked up. "What?" Emily glanced toward row 3. "Why is that passenger not receiving first-class service?" Lauren's expression tightened immediately. "Because his profile does not qualify." Emily frowned. "His profile?" Lauren nodded. "There are levels of status." Emily looked confused. "But he purchased a first-class ticket." Lauren finally looked up. "Emily, not everyone sitting in first class belongs there for the same reasons." The younger attendant stood silent for a moment. Something about the explanation felt wrong. She had reviewed manifests before. Tickets determined meals. Seats determined service. The system was usually simple. Yet Lauren spoke as if another set of rules existed. Emily glanced back toward Marcus. He was helping an elderly passenger retrieve a dropped pen from beneath a seat. The older man thanked him warmly. Marcus simply nodded and returned to his book. Nothing about him matched the image Lauren seemed to have created. A few minutes later, turbulence lightly rattled the cabin. Seatbelt signs illuminated overhead. Flight attendants secured carts and equipment. Passengers adjusted in their seats. During the brief turbulence, a glass of water tipped over from a tray table near row 2. Before anyone could react, Marcus stood, helped stabilize the table, and handed napkins to the passenger. "Thank you," the woman said. "You are very kind." Marcus smiled. "It happens." Lauren witnessed the interaction from the galley. For a brief second, uncertainty crossed her face. Then it vanished. She returned to her tablet. The aircraft soon settled back into smooth air. The seat belt sign switched off. Conversations resumed. But something else happened. One by one, passengers who had watched the events unfold began looking at Marcus differently. Not with curiosity anymore. With respect. Meanwhile, Emily quietly opened the digital passenger manifest to verify something for herself. She typed in Marcus Reed's seat number and waited for the profile to load. What appeared on the screen caused her eyes to widen slightly. She checked it again to make sure she had not misread it. Then she slowly looked toward Marcus. For the first time since the flight began, someone on that aircraft was starting to realize that the story Lauren believed was not the real story at all. Emily Carter stared at the tablet screen for several seconds before checking it again. The information did not change. Seat 3A. Marcus Reed. First class ticket confirmed. Full premium meal service included. Elite customer status verified. There was no restriction. No special note. No exception. Nothing that explained what had happened since takeoff. Around her, the galley hummed with the familiar sounds of a long flight. Coffee machines clicked softly. Ice shifted inside metal containers. Flight attendants prepared for the final beverage service before arrival. Yet Emily barely noticed any of it. Her eyes remained fixed on the passenger profile. Finally, she walked toward Lauren. "Can you look at something?" she asked quietly. Lauren glanced up from a service report. "What is it?" Emily turned the screen toward her. Seat 3A. Lauren's eyes moved across the display. For a brief moment, her expression froze. Then she handed the tablet back. "I have already reviewed it." Emily blinked. "Then you know he qualifies for every service." Lauren straightened a stack of napkins. "The system is not always accurate." Emily frowned. "The system has his meal selection, loyalty status, and ticket class." Lauren's voice became colder. "Emily, I said I handled it." The younger attendant fell silent. But the answer only deepened her concern. Across the cabin, Marcus remained seated by the window. The lights had dimmed slightly as evening settled outside. Reflections from the cabin windows floated across the darkening glass. Most passengers were relaxed now. A few slept. Others read quietly beneath individual reading lights. The older businessman across the aisle lowered his newspaper. "You know," he said softly, "most people would have demanded a manager by now." Marcus smiled faintly. "Most people are probably smarter than I am." The man laughed. "I doubt that." Marcus returned his attention to the clouds outside. Somewhere below, city lights were beginning to appear like scattered stars across the landscape. The calmness in his voice seemed genuine. Not forced. Not strategic. Genuine. A few minutes later, Emily approached his row carrying a bottle of water. "Sir," she said gently, "I wanted to make sure you had this." Marcus accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thank you." Emily hesitated. "I also wanted to apologize for your experience." Marcus looked up at her. "You did not cause it." "No," Emily admitted. "But I work here." Marcus studied her expression for a moment. "That matters." Emily was not sure what he meant. Yet somehow the answer stayed with her. As she returned toward the galley, she glanced back once more. Marcus had already returned to watching the horizon. No complaint forms. No raised voice. No demand for compensation. Just patience. Near the front of the aircraft, Lauren stood reviewing paperwork again. But this time she seemed distracted. Every few minutes, she looked toward row 3. Every time she did, she found Marcus sitting exactly where he had always been. Calm. Observing. Waiting. Then another notification appeared on Emily's tablet. It was a system synchronization from the airline's corporate database. Normally such updates meant nothing. This one caught her attention immediately. A highlighted notation appeared beside Marcus Reed's profile. Emily opened it. Her eyes widened. The information connected him to an organization she recognized instantly. A very powerful organization. Suddenly, the missing meal felt much smaller than the situation unfolding around it. Emily slowly looked up toward Marcus again. And for the second time that evening, she realized that almost nobody on this aircraft understood who was actually sitting in seat 3A. Emily kept the tablet close to her side as she walked back toward the galley. The notification remained on the screen, glowing beneath the soft cabin lights. She read it again just to be certain. The name was the same. The profile was the same. There was no mistake. Marcus Reed was connected to one of the most influential investment firms in the country. Her pulse quickened slightly, not because he was wealthy, not because he was important, but because none of that should have mattered in the first place. He should have received the same service regardless. Yet somehow the confirmation made everything feel more serious. Lauren noticed her expression immediately. "What is wrong now?" she asked. Emily hesitated. "I think you should look at this." Lauren accepted the tablet with obvious impatience. Her eyes moved across the information. For a brief second, the color seemed to drain from her face. Then she handed the device back. "That does not change anything." Emily stared at her. "It changes quite a lot." Lauren lowered her voice. "The service decision has already been made." Emily could not believe what she was hearing. The service decision was wrong. Lauren looked toward row 3. Marcus sat quietly beneath a reading light, turning a page in his book. "We are not discussing this again," Lauren said. The conversation ended there, but the tension remained. A short time later, the captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing that the flight would begin its gradual descent in about an hour. Passengers adjusted their seats and gathered personal items. The cabin lights dimmed further. Outside the windows, darkness stretched across the sky, broken only by distant city lights below. Marcus closed his book and placed it carefully inside his bag. The older businessman across the aisle leaned forward again. "You know," he said, "I have been thinking about something." Marcus smiled. "What is that?" The man glanced toward the galley. "Most people reveal who they are when things go well. You reveal who you are when things go badly." Marcus considered the statement. Sometimes difficult moments tell the truth faster. The businessman nodded slowly. Before he could say more, Emily approached row 3. This time, she carried a small tray. On it sat a fresh cup of coffee and a warm chocolate chip cookie. It was not the meal Marcus should have received. It was not even close. But it was something. "Sir," she said softly, "I know this does not fix the situation." Marcus looked at the tray and then at her. "Thank you." Emily set it down. "I am sorry." Marcus studied her expression. The apology was sincere. There was no corporate language. No script. Just honesty. "That matters more than you think," he replied. Emily smiled faintly and returned toward the galley. As she walked away, she noticed several passengers watching. Not with curiosity anymore. With understanding. The entire cabin seemed to recognize what had happened, even if nobody said it aloud. Then a new notification appeared on the service tablet mounted near the galley. A priority communication request from airline headquarters. Lauren opened it automatically. Her confident expression disappeared almost instantly. The message contained only one question. It was short. It was direct. And somehow it felt heavier than anything that had happened all evening. The screen read, "Please confirm the condition and satisfaction status of passenger Marcus Reed immediately." Lauren stared at the message for several long seconds. Around her, the familiar sounds of the aircraft seemed to fade into the background. The question on the screen was simple, but it carried a weight she could not ignore. "Please confirm the condition and satisfaction status of passenger Marcus Reed immediately." There was no greeting, no explanation, no routine customer service language. Just a direct request from airline headquarters. Emily stood nearby and noticed Lauren's reaction immediately. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Lauren locked the screen. "Nothing." But her voice lacked its usual confidence. Emily knew better. Moments later, another notification arrived. Then another. The first came from customer relations. The second came from executive services. Both referenced the same passenger. Both requested an immediate update. Lauren felt a knot forming in her stomach. In nearly 2 decades of flying, she had never seen multiple corporate departments contact an aircraft about a single passenger during a flight. Across the cabin, Marcus sat quietly beneath the soft reading light above seat 3A. The warm cookie Emily had brought remained half-eaten beside a cup of coffee. He appeared completely unaware of the growing concern spreading through the front galley. Or perhaps he was aware and simply chose not to show it. The older businessman across the aisle looked toward him again. "You seem remarkably calm." Marcus smiled. Being upset would not change what already happened. The man nodded slowly. "Most people do not think that way." Marcus glanced out the window where distant city lights sparkled beneath the darkness. Most situations reveal themselves eventually. Back in the galley, Lauren finally opened the newest message. This one came from an executive account she recognized immediately. Her eyes widened. The communication requested direct confirmation that Marcus Reed had received full premium service and appropriate accommodation throughout the flight. Lauren felt the blood drain from her face. Full premium service. Appropriate accommodation. Neither statement could honestly be confirmed. Emily looked over her shoulder and read enough to understand the problem. "Lauren," she whispered. Lauren did not respond. For the first time that evening, doubt began replacing certainty. She replayed every interaction in her mind. The meal, the dessert, the comments about status, the assumptions she had made before speaking to him. Suddenly, each moment felt different than it had before. Near the front of the cabin, the lead pilot stepped briefly out of the cockpit. Lauren quietly approached him and explained the growing situation. The pilot listened carefully. His expression became serious. "Corporate contacted the aircraft?" he asked. Lauren nodded. "Several times." The pilot glanced toward seat 3A. Marcus was helping an elderly passenger adjust an overhead reading light. Nothing about him appeared demanding or entitled. If anything, he seemed like the calmest person on board. "Do we know who he is?" the pilot asked. Lauren hesitated. Emily answered before she could. "Not completely, but I think headquarters does." The pilot looked back toward Marcus again. A thoughtful silence followed. Then another notification appeared. This one was marked urgent. Emily opened it first. Her eyes widened immediately. The message came from someone even higher within the airline's corporate structure. The request was no longer asking whether Marcus was satisfied. It was asking why concerns had been raised in the first place. For the first time since takeoff, genuine fear entered Lauren Whitmore's eyes. Meanwhile, unaware to most passengers, Marcus closed his book, folded his hands comfortably in his lap, and watched the lights of New York slowly appear beyond the darkness ahead. The aircraft had begun its gradual descent toward New York, and the subtle change could be felt throughout the cabin. Engines adjusted their pitch. Window shades lifted as passengers looked out at the scattered lights below. Flight attendants completed final checks, collected remaining cups, and prepared the cabin for arrival. Yet near the front galley, nobody seemed focused on landing anymore. Every conversation had narrowed to a single name. Marcus Reed. Lauren stood beside the service station staring at the latest message from headquarters. She had read it 4 times already. The wording remained unchanged. Corporate leadership wanted a complete report immediately after arrival. Passenger experience concerns had been escalated. Senior executives had been notified. The situation was no longer a routine customer service issue. Emily quietly watched Lauren struggle to process what was happening. "Maybe you should talk to him," she suggested. Lauren looked up. "Talk to him." "Actually talk to him," Emily said. "Not as a problem. As a passenger." Lauren glanced toward row 3. Marcus sat calmly beneath the soft cabin lighting, looking out the window at the approaching city. He appeared completely at peace. That somehow made everything harder. People usually became angry when treated unfairly. They demanded attention. They raised their voices. Marcus had done none of those things. His restraint now felt more powerful than any complaint could have been. Nearby, the older businessman leaned across the aisle once again. "May I ask you something?" he said. Marcus smiled. "Of course." The man folded his newspaper. "When this flight is over, what are you going to do?" Marcus considered the question for a moment. "I am going to attend a meeting tomorrow morning." The businessman laughed softly. "That is not what I meant." Marcus looked at him knowingly. "I know." The man lowered his voice. "Most people would want consequences." Marcus turned toward the window again. Reflections from the city lights shimmered across the glass. "Consequences are not the same thing as revenge," he said quietly. The answer lingered between them. A few rows away, another passenger who had witnessed the entire evening listened carefully. Several others were doing the same. Without realizing it, Marcus had become the center of attention in a cabin that had once overlooked him. Minutes later, Lauren finally approached row 3. Her steps felt unusually heavy. She stopped beside Marcus's seat. For the first time since boarding, she seemed uncertain. "Mr. Reed," she said softly. Marcus looked up. "Yes." Lauren hesitated. The confidence that had defined her throughout the flight was gone. "I wanted to check whether you needed anything before we land." Marcus studied her expression. It was different now. Not warm. Not friendly. Just honest. "No," he replied gently. "I am fine." Lauren nodded. She remained standing there for another second, as if searching for something else to say. Eventually, she walked away without finding the words. Back in the galley, Another message arrived from headquarters. Emily opened it first. Her eyes widened immediately. Attached to the communication was a photograph from a recent business magazine cover. The man smiling from the cover was sitting only 30 feet away, in seat 3A. Beneath the image was a headline identifying him as the chief executive officer of one of the most influential investment firms in America. Emily slowly lowered the screen. Lauren saw the photograph. The moment her eyes landed on it, every remaining assumption she had been holding onto collapsed at once. For several seconds, Lauren could not take her eyes off the photograph. The image showed the same man sitting quietly in seat 3A. The same calm expression. The same thoughtful eyes. Except in the photograph, he stood on a stage beneath bright lights while business journalists surrounded him. Headlines praised his leadership. Industry publications described him as one of the most influential executives in modern finance. Lauren felt her throat tighten. Emily slowly lowered the tablet. Neither woman spoke. The reality settling over the galley had nothing to do with wealth or status. It was the realization that everything should have been different from the beginning. Marcus should have received the same courtesy every passenger deserved. Instead, assumptions had replaced facts. The aircraft continued descending through the night sky. Seatbelt signs illuminated across the cabin. Passengers began securing personal belongings. The lights of New York now stretched across the darkness below like an ocean of gold. In first class, several passengers had already noticed the unusual tension among the crew. The older businessman glanced toward the galley and then toward Marcus. "Something tells me they finally looked you up." Marcus smiled faintly. "Maybe. You knew they would eventually." Marcus considered the statement. Truth usually arrives on its own schedule. The businessman shook his head in disbelief. "I still do not understand how you stayed so calm." Marcus looked out the window. Because anger would not have taught anyone anything. A few seats away, another passenger quietly listened. The words spread through the cabin more effectively than any argument could have. Near the front galley, Lauren finally gathered enough courage to approach the captain again. She showed him the photograph and the corporate communications. The captain read everything carefully. His expression grew more serious with every line. "Headquarters knows exactly who he is," he said quietly. Lauren nodded. "Apparently." The captain looked toward seat 3A. "Then the question is not who he is." Lauren swallowed hard. "What is the question?" The captain's answer came slowly. Why he was treated this way. Neither of them had a response. Minutes later, another priority message arrived. This one included instructions for airline leadership meeting the flight upon arrival. Emily read it first. Her eyes widened immediately. Several senior executives would be waiting at the gate. Customer experience. Corporate relations. Human resources. The level of response was extraordinary. Lauren felt a cold wave of realization move through her chest. This situation had grown far beyond a meal. Far beyond a passenger complaint. Every decision made during the flight was about to be examined. Every report, every interaction, every witness statement. Across the cabin, Marcus remained completely unaware of the latest developments, or at least appeared to be. He simply watched the city lights drawing closer beneath the wing. The aircraft began its final approach. The cabin lights dimmed further. Outside, the runway lights shimmered in the distance. Emily walked to row 3-1 last time before landing. "Mr. Reed," she said softly. Marcus looked up. "Yes." Emily hesitated. "Thank you for being patient tonight." Marcus smiled warmly. "Thank you for being kind." Emily felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her chest. She nodded and returned to her jump seat. As the aircraft lined up with the runway, Lauren remained motionless near the galley. For the first time all evening, she was no longer worried about who Marcus Reed was. She was beginning to understand who she had been. The wheels touched the runway with a soft jolt, and a quiet ripple moved through the cabin. Passengers lifted their heads. Seat belts remained fastened as the aircraft rolled through the darkness toward the terminal. Outside the windows, rows of blue and white lights stretched across the airport like glowing pathways. Inside the cabin, however, the attention of more than a few passengers remained fixed on row 3. Marcus Reed sat exactly as he had for most of the flight, calm and unhurried. He did not reach for his phone immediately. He did not stand the moment the aircraft slowed. He simply waited. Across the aisle, the older businessman smiled. "Looks like we made it." Marcus nodded. "Looks like it." The man hesitated. "I have a feeling this evening is not over." Marcus looked toward the front of the aircraft where several crew members appeared unusually tense. You may be right. Near the galley, Lauren Whitmore could feel her heartbeat in her ears. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the aircraft door. Another message had arrived just before landing. Airline executives were already waiting at the gate. Not one executive. Several. The captain had confirmed it himself after speaking with operations. Lauren had worked thousands of flights during her career. She had seen delays, complaints, weather diversions, and emergency schedule changes. She had never seen corporate leadership meet a domestic flight because of a single passenger experience issue. Emily sat quietly in her jump seat, replaying the evening in her mind. The missing meal no longer seemed like the central event. It had become a symbol of something larger. A series of assumptions. A failure to see a person before seeing a stereotype. As the aircraft finally reached the gate, passengers prepared to deplane. The seat belt sign switched off. Overhead bins opened. Conversations resumed. Yet many travelers remained curious about what would happen next. The captain opened the cockpit door and exchanged a brief look with Lauren. Neither spoke. They did not need to. A few moments later, the aircraft door opened. Cool air entered the cabin from the jet bridge. Then something unexpected happened. Several people in business attire appeared outside the doorway. Not ground staff. Not gate agents. Executives. Their posture alone made that obvious. One of them spoke quietly with the captain. Another held a tablet. A third scanned the passenger cabin. Lauren felt her stomach sink. The older businessman noticed them immediately. Well, he whispered, that answers my question. Marcus glanced toward the doorway. His expression did not change. Passengers began exiting row by row. Some offered polite smiles to Marcus as they passed. Others nodded respectfully. Emily remained near the front, helping direct traffic, but she noticed something remarkable. More than one passenger paused briefly beside Marcus to shake his hand before leaving. Not because they knew his title. Most of them still did not. They did it because they had watched his character. Eventually, first class began to empty. The cabin grew quieter. The executives outside the aircraft remained in place, waiting. Lauren stood frozen near the galley as reality settled over her. The flight was over. The reports would begin. The questions would come. For the first time all evening, she understood that the most important person on board had never been the man connected to a powerful company. The most important person on board had been the passenger she failed to treat with simple respect. And just beyond the open aircraft door, the consequences of that lesson were already waiting. The last passengers stepped into the jet bridge, and an unusual silence settled over the first-class cabin. Overhead bins stood open. Empty seats stretched beneath the soft cabin lighting. Outside the aircraft door, the group of executives remained waiting. None appeared impatient. If anything, they looked prepared. Marcus Reed finally rose from seat 3A and retrieved his travel bag from the overhead compartment. His movements were unhurried. The same calm that had defined the entire flight remained unchanged. Across the cabin, Lauren Whitmore watched him stand. For a brief moment, she remembered the first time she had seen him board. She remembered the assumptions she had made before speaking a single sentence to him. Now those memories felt heavier than any corporate message or executive meeting waiting outside. Marcus adjusted the strap of his bag and stepped into the aisle. As he approached the front of the aircraft, Emily offered a quiet smile. Thank you for flying with us tonight. Marcus returned the smile. Thank you for your kindness. Emily nodded, feeling both relieved and nervous at the same time. Then Marcus reached the aircraft door. The moment he stepped into the jet bridge, one of the waiting executives immediately approached him. Several crew members inside the cabin could see the interaction through the open doorway. The executive extended his hand respectfully. Marcus shook it. No dramatic reaction. No raised voices. Just professional recognition. Another executive joined them. Then another. Lauren felt her stomach tighten. The reality she had spent hours resisting was now impossible to avoid. The man she had dismissed was being greeted by senior leadership with a level of respect rarely shown to anyone. A few moments later, the captain received a request to remain on board briefly. Lauren and Emily were asked to stay as well. The request came directly from airline leadership. Minutes passed. Through the doorway, silhouettes moved inside the terminal. Conversations took place out of earshot. Eventually, one of the executives stepped back onto the aircraft. His expression remained professional. We will need a complete report regarding the service experience of passenger Marcus Reed, he said calmly. Nobody answered immediately. The executive continued. Corporate leadership has already opened a formal review. Lauren lowered her eyes. Every detail of the evening replayed through her mind. The missing meal, the comments about status, the refusal to verify the facts, the opportunities she had ignored. None of it sounded reasonable anymore. The executive glanced around the cabin. Mr. Reed has not requested any special action. That statement surprised everyone. Emily looked up immediately. Even Lauren seemed shocked. He is not, she asked quietly. No, the executive replied. In fact, he specifically requested that the review focus on facts rather than emotions. The words landed harder than criticism would have. Marcus could have demanded consequences. He could have demanded immediate action. Instead, he had asked for fairness. The same fairness he had been denied. Through the open doorway, Lauren caught one final glimpse of him farther down the terminal. He was speaking with executives, but there was nothing triumphant in his posture. No celebration. No arrogance. Just a man preparing to continue his evening. For the first time all night, Lauren understood something important. The most powerful person she had ever met was not powerful because of money, influence, or titles. He was powerful because even after being treated unfairly, he still chose dignity over revenge. And somehow that realization hurt far more than any punishment ever could. The terminal had grown quieter by the time the first review meeting began. Most passengers were already gone, disappearing into the rhythm of New York at night. Outside the large airport windows, rows of aircraft lights shimmered against the darkness. Inside a private conference room near the executive offices, Marcus Reed sat across from several airline leaders. A cup of coffee rested untouched beside him. The executives had expected frustration. Some had prepared for anger. Instead, they found a man speaking with remarkable calm. One executive cleared his throat. Mr. Reed, we want to express our sincere apology for your experience. Marcus nodded politely. I appreciate that. Another executive leaned forward. We understand you were denied multiple service items included with your ticket. That is correct, Marcus replied. We also understand comments were made suggesting you did not qualify for those services. Marcus remained silent for a moment. Yes. The room grew still. The executives exchanged brief glances. One finally asked the question they had all been avoiding. Would you like us to take immediate disciplinary action? Marcus looked through the glass wall toward the distant runway lights. His answer came quietly. I would like you to understand why it happened. The room fell silent again. Several executives lowered their eyes. That answer carried more weight than any demand could have. Back inside the terminal operations office, Lauren Whitmore sat alone reviewing her written statement. The words blurred together after a while. Every sentence seemed to lead back to the same uncomfortable truth. She had formed conclusions before gathering facts. She had decided who Marcus was before allowing him to show her. For years she had considered herself experienced, professional, fair. Yet the events of one evening had forced her to question assumptions she had never examined before. Across the room, Emily completed her own report. She described everything exactly as it happened. No exaggeration. No omissions. When she finished, she looked up and noticed Lauren sitting quietly. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Emily walked over and sat beside her. Are you okay? She asked gently. Lauren laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. Not really. Emily nodded. I understand. Lauren stared at the floor. The worst part is not the investigation. Emily waited. Lauren continued. The worst part is realizing he never treated me the way I treated him. The observation hung in the air between them. It was true. Throughout the entire flight, Marcus had remained respectful, even when given reasons not to be, even when nobody would have blamed him for reacting differently. Meanwhile, several floors above, the executive meeting was ending. One airline leader thanked Marcus for his time. Another promised a complete review process. Marcus stood and gathered his belongings. Before leaving, he paused beside the conference table. May I ask one thing? He said. The executives immediately nodded. Of course. Marcus looked at each of them. Do not make this about one employee. The executives appeared surprised. Marcus continued. Make it about understanding why assumptions become decisions. Because that problem does not belong to one person. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Eventually, one executive nodded slowly. We understand. Marcus offered a small smile and walked toward the door. As he disappeared into the corridor, the room remained silent behind him. Not because the meeting had ended, because everyone present understood that the most important lesson from the evening had nothing to do with a missed meal. It was about the quiet damage caused when people stop seeing individuals and start seeing only their assumptions. The review process continued over the following days, far away from the attention of passengers and headlines. Inside conference rooms at corporate headquarters, investigators examined every detail from the flight. Passenger manifests were reviewed. Service records were compared. Crew statements were collected. Security footage from boarding areas was analyzed. What began as a complaint about service slowly revealed a larger pattern of decision-making that airline leadership could no longer ignore. Lauren Whitmore sat through multiple interviews. Each conversation forced her to revisit the same moments. The meal cart stopping beside seat 3A. The assumptions she had made. The explanations she had given herself. None of them sounded convincing anymore. For the first time in many years, she was not defending her actions. She was trying to understand them. One afternoon, after another lengthy meeting, she sat alone beside a large window overlooking the airport. Aircraft lifted into the sky one after another, their lights disappearing into the clouds. Emily Carter approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Lauren and sat beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The silence felt easier than conversation. Finally, Lauren looked toward the runway. "Do you know what keeps bothering me?" Emily shook her head. Lauren wrapped both hands around the warm cup. "I keep thinking about how many chances I had to stop and verify the facts." Emily listened quietly. The information was there. The boarding pass was there. The system was there. He was sitting right in front of me. Her voice grew softer. "I just never looked." Emily nodded slowly. "Sometimes people see what they expect to see." Lauren stared through the glass. That is exactly the problem. Across the city, Marcus Reed had already returned to his normal routine. Board meetings filled his mornings. Investment reviews filled his afternoons. Yet the flight remained on his mind as well. Not because of the inconvenience. Not because of the missed meal. What stayed with him was the reminder that respect could disappear surprisingly quickly when assumptions entered the room. One evening, an airline executive called to provide an update. The investigation had concluded. New training programs were being developed. Service procedures were being revised. Additional oversight measures were being introduced. The executive sounded proud of the changes. Marcus listened patiently. "That sounds like progress," he said. "We hope so," the executive replied. Before ending the call, he hesitated. "There is one more thing. Ms. Whitmore asked us to pass along a message." Marcus remained silent. "She wanted you to know that she is sorry. Not because of the consequences. Because she finally understands what happened." For a moment, Marcus looked out the window of his office. The city lights reflected across the glass much like they had across the aircraft window days earlier. "Thank you for telling me," he said quietly. After the call ended, he remained standing there for several minutes. Somewhere across the country, airplanes continued crossing the night sky. People continued meeting strangers. First impressions continued forming in seconds. But perhaps one lesson from a single flight would travel farther than the aircraft ever had. Because real change rarely begins with punishment. It begins when someone finally sees the truth about themselves and chooses not to look away. Several months later, the memory of that flight still lingered in places nobody expected. New training materials had been introduced throughout the airline. Crew workshops now included discussions about unconscious assumptions, professionalism, and the importance of verifying facts before making decisions. Most employees never learned the full story behind those changes. They only knew that a single passenger experience had become a lesson discussed across the company. On a quiet autumn evening, Lauren Whitmore stood near a departure gate preparing for another flight. The airport buzzed with its usual rhythm. Rolling suitcases crossed polished floors. Boarding announcements echoed through the terminal. Travelers hurried toward destinations scattered across the country. Everything looked familiar, yet Lauren no longer viewed her work the same way. Over the previous months, she had spent a great deal of time reflecting, not on what happened to her career, not on corporate reviews, on the simple question Marcus Reed had asked during the flight. How often do people decide who belongs somewhere before checking the facts? The question had followed her everywhere. It appeared in conversations. It appeared in moments of silence. It appeared whenever she met someone new. Nearby, a young flight attendant approached carrying a passenger manifest. She looked nervous. "First week," Lauren asked with a small smile. The young woman laughed. "Is it that obvious?" Lauren nodded. "A little." They shared a brief laugh before boarding preparations continued. A few minutes later, Lauren noticed an elderly passenger struggling with a heavy carry-on bag. Before anyone else could react, the young flight attendant rushed forward to help. The passenger smiled gratefully. Lauren watched the exchange and felt something warm settle in her chest. Small moments mattered. They always had. Across the country, Marcus stood inside a conference room overlooking downtown Chicago. Evening sunlight reflected from nearby skyscrapers, casting long golden patterns across the glass walls. Another successful meeting had just ended. Colleagues gathered documents and prepared to leave. Before walking out, one executive paused beside Marcus. "I read an article about the airline changes," he said. "Apparently, they completely revised several training programs." Marcus smiled faintly. "That is good." The executive looked surprised. "You are not interested in taking credit?" Marcus glanced toward the city skyline. The goal was never credit. After the room emptied, he remained by the window for a few moments. Far below, traffic lights flickered through the streets like streams of moving stars. He thought about airports, airplanes, strangers crossing paths for a few hours and then disappearing into different lives. Most people would never know how much influence a brief encounter could have. Sometimes a conversation lasted only seconds, yet stayed with someone for years. Somewhere that same evening, an aircraft climbed into the darkening sky above New York. Passengers settled into their seats. Flight attendants moved through the cabin offering assistance. Outside the windows, the last traces of sunlight faded beyond the horizon. Life continued exactly as it always had. But perhaps one thing was different. Perhaps somewhere aboard that aircraft, someone paused before making an assumption. Perhaps someone chose curiosity instead of judgment, respect instead of dismissal. And as city lights shimmered beneath the clouds, the lesson from one quiet passenger continued traveling farther than any airplane ever could. He did not change the world. He changed a few hearts. And sometimes that is where the world begins.